Good morning, friends. Good morning. Oh, let's see what's going on here. There we are. Now it's working. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Greetings and salutations, kind folks. Here we are on Tuesday, July 19th, correct? Yeah, I have to change the date on my calendar. I had to figure that out in my head. It's a few days behind, actually, not just one. But this is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian, and I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. And this is PB Reads the Bible, where I take some time and read usually a chapter, sometimes more, sometimes less, out of a section of the Bible, and talk to you about it, try to unpack it a little bit, help you understand some context and subcontext, and maybe what's really taking place in the passage, rather than just that surface level story that might be taking place. And I say story because we're doing a narrative section of the book of the Bible right now. Today is episode 3 on our journey through what is known as 2 Samuel. As I've said before, 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel originally were just one book, one giant scroll, we might say. And in the Hebrew Bible, it is still treated as one book of the Bible, as our 1st and 2nd Kings is just Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles are just Chronicles. That explains some of the reason for the difference in the number of books in a Hebrew Bible and in a Protestant Old Testament, or Christian Old Testament for that matter, because the Roman Catholic Old Testament is the same. It's just that the official Catholic Bible does include the Apocrypha as important as scripture. So anyway, I digress, because we're here for 2 Samuel. So we're gonna be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 3 today. But first things first, I'd ask you to go ahead and check in. Let me know you're here and that you're watching, whether you're live or whether you're watching this, whether you're watching this live at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, or if you're watching the recording at some other time today or tomorrow or whatever it might be. I go back in and I look to see who's been watching and who's made comments on things, because questions and comments are important. I learn from you folks oftentimes through the questions that you ask. Excuse me. Seeing some weird things here. Anyway. That's odd. I hope this is working properly. Looks some weird things taking place, but go ahead. Okay, good morning. Oh, okay, I am getting a comment, so it is working. Good morning, Maureen. Good to have you joining us this morning. Nice sunny morning. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's a nice sunny morning here as well. Wore my sunglasses on the way in this morning. I am sitting over there, ready for when I go out again in a little bit. Good morning, Cheryl. You're popping right on there. Great. I was confused and concerned because Facebook didn't give me a notification saying that we had gone live. So I'm glad that it's working, that you're seeing this. Oh gosh, do I have any? It's Tuesday. Wake up, Brian. Do I have any announcements? I don't think I have any announcements for the week. We should be good to go both tomorrow and Thursday live. Yeah, even if I'm not, you are. So sorry, the recording will be if I'm not. Joys and concerns kind of thing. You know, this is a small group, so we share life together. And I just want to pass along to you folk that Jolene, dear sister from here at the church, who we'd mentioned and have been in prayer for, was as she was on hospice, did die yesterday. She has gone on to meet Jesus. She's with Jesus. She's with her Lord and Savior. She had told me when I saw her a few days ago, she said, "I wish this part of the journey didn't take so long." she truly was a blessing. She was ready to go. Her faith and her beliefs are very powerful. So I think her family can take comfort in that. One of my neighbors is a good friend of hers, and I called to share the news with her this morning. She said, "You're calling with bad news, with sad news, aren't you?" And I told her yes. And she said, "Well, when I saw her, I think she said yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday. So when I saw her, she said she was ready to fly." So her memorial service, her service of death and resurrection, that is how the United Methodist Church refers to the worship officially. We don't do a service, we don't do a service of death. We don't do a funeral service. We do a service of death and resurrection. That's an important part of that. But that will actually, she pre-planned it to take place at the church. So when that information comes out, I will make sure that it gets distributed. Make sure that it gets distributed. Fly with the eagles. Yes, fly with the eagles. Reminds me of that song, right? We will bear you up on eagle's wings. Lift you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn. Anyway, which is based on a passage from Isaiah. Okay, enough of that, right? But if you have other things that are on your hearts that you wanted to share, that you want us to be in prayer about, go ahead and list them in the comments section, say something, or you can always send me a text if you just wanted something a little private, 570-351-1619. So again, of course, if I look off to my left, I'm watching Facebook and seeing what you're putting there. If I look to my right, it's because my phone vibrated and I want to see what's going on. And see what's going on there. Otherwise, I'll just be in focus with you. All right. So 2 Samuel chapter 3, just as the reminder of what has taken place, David has been anointed by humans as king of Judah, the southern kingdom, we would end up saying, even though they're not fully a kingdom yet. And in the north, Abner has taken Ishboeth, or Ishbaal, whichever translation you had, and made him king in the north, and is residing in Mahanaim. All right, and then we had that battle. We know that there is a war, that there is war between the north and the south. Here's some things we don't know what that war looked like. Okay, we don't know what that war looked like. So some of the thoughts on it, based on the context, based on how the story is kind of put together and stuff like that, we don't see all-out frontal war. Okay, so the war seems to be more incursions, side battles, skirmishes kind of thing going on. We don't have a full frontal attack by the north or by the south. So we don't have David driving north with an army to conquer land. And that's important. Scholars think that's why it's written this way, to let us know that that's not how it happened, that David didn't take the kingdom through force. Much of Samuel, all of Samuel, is really David's story, okay? When we separate it in 1st and 2nd Samuel, it almost starts to look like 1st Samuel is Saul's story and 2nd Samuel is David's story. But ultimately, when you look at the whole thing, it's David throughout the whole thing, throughout the entire book of Samuel. And a major theme running through in several different ways seems to be defending David. The author seems to be defending David from complaints, from what he or she felt were incorrect accusations. That perhaps David was being accused of conspiring to kill Saul, Jonathan, that he was responsible for all that. So the author makes sure to point out how that could not have possibly been the case. Others may have said, well, David took the throne by force. And so the author has been painstakingly pointing out how that is not the case, that he was anointed first by God and then by humans to be king of the South. And we're seeing that he is not going with an all-out frontal attack to take land by force. In fact, eventually we're going to see that the leaders of the houses of the north, the tribes of the north, come to David. David doesn't go and attack them. They come to him and proclaim him king. That's important stuff. That's important stuff. Perhaps that's a little bit of a spoiler. We're getting ahead of ourselves there. This passage, this book, this chapter talks about war, and it's important to see what they say and what they don't say. And again, it's no like full frontal war out. It's not an all-out attack by either side, but especially not from David. And that's important. All right, so starting chapter 3, verse 1. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Pause. So see, it's a long war, which would make sense if it is that kind of skirmishing battles kind of thing. David's growing stronger and stronger, not because he's invading or taking land, but because more and more people are coming to him of their own will. That's the author's point here. And more people and more support is leaving from Ishbaal, the house of Saul. And it's still David versus Saul, we see. All right, continuing, verse 2. Sons were born to David at Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Caleb of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. The fifth, Shaphatiah, son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, of David's wife Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. Pause. Whew. All right. So David has 6 kids from 6 different wives while in Hebron, which we're told he was in Hebron for 7.5 years. So he has 6 kids in 7.5 years. He has at least 6 kids. I should correct myself, because these were his 6 sons. These were his 6 sons from 6 different women. So each wife of David gives him 1 son. Might have had daughters too. Author's not concerned about that. It's the males. Why? Well, yeah, we can go with the standard reply of the males are the ones that are most important. The women don't mean a whole lot, but especially with regards to king and throne succession. Just think about King Henry VIII and how hard he worked to get a male heir, and how many women he married, divorced, executed in order to try to make that happen, and couldn't make that happen, etc. So David seems to be in a different situation where he's got 6 wives, each of whom gives him a son. Each of whom gives him a son, and they're named, and the wives are named. And most of these names are new. We had only ever heard of Ahinoam and Abigail until now. And Michal, let's not forget about Michal, who was promised to be his wife, was going to be his wife, but then was taken away when he had to flee from Saul. But now we've got 4 other wives that we haven't heard of before. Of these 6 sons, Three we're going to hear a lot about. The other three we're really not going to hear anything about. At least not. At least not much. We're not going to hear of three of them much at all. The three A's. Let's go with the three A's: Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah. We will hear from again. In fact, they play major roles in the later part of David's life, the later part of his kingdom. They also play important roles in the succession following David's death. Okay, which actually goes into the Book of Kings, but that's all right. But some of it takes place in Samuel, and we'll get to that. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Excuse me one moment. There we are. All right, I'm back. But the other three, Kileab, Shephatiah, and Ithream, are barely known to us. They're barely known to us. So they're barely known to us at all. But the three A's play important roles. Picking up from there, because now the story shifts a little bit. While there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Pause. Now remember Abner. Abner was the commander of Saul's army, and with the death of Saul and two of his sons and the fleeing of Israel's army, and Philistines coming in, he takes it upon himself to establish Ishboeth, depending on which translation, as the king of Israel, and sets him up. But some of the context makes it look like Abner is the power behind the throne. Abner's the power behind the throne. That's pretty blunt. And now we're going to see him try to make himself even stronger. Okay. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbaal said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Pause. So concubine, we're not 100% sure what they really mean by that or what the social context was. And it could have been a couple different things. Some think that concubines were mostly slaves, whereas others think that concubines were more or less like a second level wife, a second tier wife. You have your first tier wife, or in some cases wives, and then you have your secondary wives or second tier wives, and that concubines were down in there. We're not 100% sure which of those is correct. Perhaps both are correct. What we can say about Rizpah is that it doesn't look like she was a slave, because her father is named. She is named as daughter of Aiah, which most likely, if she was a slave, they wouldn't have cared who her father was. She would have just been completely property. Oh, there's also the thought that concubines were, like I said, wives of a second tier wife, lower tier wife, and that they actually came from the lower classes, whereas the first tier wives, the primary wives, came from upper classes, or equal classes to the man, whoever he might be, in most cases the king. And we're going to find out about Rizpah more later on. She does play a role in, she has a role to play later. Here, not much. But Ishbaal charges Abner with having sexual intercourse with Rizpah, with his father's concubine. What's that mean? Why is, well, today that would just be wrong, period. But why is it wrong then? Well, having sex with the king's concubine or wife or secondary wife or whatever would basically be trying to assert your claim to the throne. If anyone should have had sex with Rizpah, it should have been Ishbaal, because he was, based on succession, the rightful person to take the throne. Since he was probably too young to have done it, that's the thinking anyway, based on everything that's taken place so far. Abner goes ahead and does it. Now, Abner, why did Abner do it? Abner certainly could have done it as proxy for Ishbaal. Maybe that's what he was thinking when he did it. But that's not what Ishbaal sees. That's not what Ishbaal thinks. Ishbaal thinks that Abner is doing it to subvert him, to try to take his place, excuse me, on the throne, and to put forward his claim to the throne, Abner's claim to the throne. Hence the accusation, why have you gone into my father's concubine? It has nothing to do with being concerned about the woman having, the guy having had sex with the woman, or especially, rape or anything like that, or, it's unseemly. No, that has nothing to do with it. It's all political. The words of Ishbaal made Abner very angry. He said, "Am I a dog's head for Judah?" Which apparently is just an epithet for, for nothing, for a low status person. Am I this kind of mongrel to you? Today I keep showing loyalty to the house of your father Saul, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David, and yet you charge me now with a crime concerning this woman. Pause. There's that word loyalty, which is that word hesed. It's covenant loyalty. So it's this, I've had a covenant with you, and I've done all this stuff for you, and have not given you over, and yet this is the way you treat me. Continuing, so may God do to Abner, and so may he add to it. For just what Yahweh has shown to David, that will I accomplish for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba. And Ishbaal could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. Pause. So we're seeing a couple things about both of these people. We see in Abner, indignation at being accused of a crime, of wrongdoing, of being unfaithful to his king, defending himself with, how loyal I've been. But you know what? And I haven't done this, but you know what? Now I will. I'm going to turn out. I'm going to help David get rid of you. Is basically what he's saying. So he's gone from defense to he's gone from a defensive position to an attack position. He's made his own threats. He's gone from just being defensive to being threatening. And Ishbaal can't do anything. He's just too afraid. So we're seeing a very weak king. We're seeing a weak king who is just filled with fear over this one person. Picking up from there, Abner sent messages to David at Hebron, saying, "To whom does the land belong?" Pause. Seems like a rhetorical question, could be read two different ways: Yahweh or David, and the answer would rhetorically be David. "Make your covenant with me, and I will give you my support to bring all Israel over to you." He, David, said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you. But one thing I require of you, you shall never appear in my presence unless you bring Saul's daughter Michal when you come to see me." Pause. So we're reminded of Michal, who David was supposed to marry, but was given away to somebody else when David had to flee from Saul's presence. She loved David. We don't know how she feels about David now, because now this has nothing to do with love. This has nothing to do with David wanting another wife. He's got 6 of them, right? This has everything to do with politics. She is a pawn in a political game. She's a pawn in a political game. One of the reasons Saul had given her to somebody else was to remove David's claim to the throne through her, to delegitimize him trying to take over. David is trying to get her back to help sustain and strengthen his position, especially among those who still like Saul's family and kingdom and have nice memories, so to speak. Continuing, then David sent messengers to Saul's son Ishbaal, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, to whom I became engaged at the price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines." Pause. So this is interesting. David had made told Abner, "You're not going to come, you can't come to me unless you have Michal." But Abner doesn't go back to Ishbaal. David sends messengers directly to Ishbaal. Must be some little subterfuge going on there. And Ishbaal has no idea that Abner is involved, or shows no idea that Abner is involved. In fact, Abner must go back because he still has a part to play with Ishbaal. And David reminds him what I had to do to get her, how powerful a warrior he is, that he accomplished that task. Ishbaal sent and took her from her husband Paltiel. I'm sorry, hang on one sec. Yeah. Took her from her husband Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping as he walked behind her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went back. Pause. So we see an image of this Paltiel, like a wounded dog, whimpering dog, cowering and chasing after this whole situation. We might see him. I mean, he's sort of a pathetic creature, but something that we would draw our compassion. He seems to truly be in love with his wife, and she's being taken away from him. But he doesn't know what to do. He's powerless. So all he can do is follow behind weeping. Oh, so sad. Such a sad scene. But as soon as Abner speaks, "Go back home," we could read into that a very threatening tone. And Paltiel gives in and goes home. Continuing. And we see Abner continuing his deception of King Ishbaal. Abner sent word to the elders of Israel, saying, "For some time past, you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about, for Yahweh has promised David, through my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from all their enemies." Abner also spoke directly to the Benjaminites. Then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin were ready to do. Pause. And specifically that house of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. Remember our conversation. That's where Saul was from. They should be the ones that are the most devoted to Ishbaal. And yet Abner is able to go and speak to them and get them to agree. So Abner is quite we might say that Abner is quite the diplomat. We already know that he's quite the warrior and hot-headed or whatever, but he's very politically astute. Continuing, when Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner said to David, "Let me go and rally all Israel to my lord the king, in order that they may make a covenant with you and that you may reign over all that your heart desires." So David dismissed Abner and he went away in peace. In peace. Pause. Shalom. So that's important because the author uses that several times in the next couple of verses as well. David welcomes him, has his grand party. The author is again pointing out this relationship, this covenant that's being established between David and Abner. All things look great, and he dismisses them in peace. Just then, the servants of David arrived with Joab from a raid, bringing much spoil with them. Pause. It doesn't say, but we can presume it's like that raid that David and his troops had when they left Ziklag and went after the Amalekites. So it's probably one of those kind of raids, and they're coming back with all kind of stuff, the spoils of war. Continuing, but Abner was not with David at Hebron, for David had dismissed him, and he had gone away in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told Joab, Abner, son of Ner, came to the king, and he has dismissed him, and he has gone away in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Abner came to you. Why did you dismiss him so that he got away? You know that Abner, son of Ner, came to deceive you and to learn your comings and goings and to learn all that you are doing. Pause. So Joab wasn't there. He finds out as soon as he comes back. He goes right up to the king. We've been told 3 times that he was dismissed, that Abner was dismissed in peace. 3 times we're told that. Joab shows up and says, why did you dismiss him? You know, he was just deceiving you. Joab is angry at Abner for having killed his brother, right? Ahazel. He's still not Ahazel. Azahel. He's upset about that. He's angry about that. Now he's angry at David for letting him get away. He was in the clutch. He was in the palm of your hand. Continuing, we're not given a response of David. We can presume that Joab just stormed right out in his anger, fierce anger, not even giving David a chance to reply, perhaps, or if he did reply, it wasn't enough to stop him. And the author indicates that David had no knowledge of what takes place yet next. Continuing, when Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah. But David did not know about it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gateway to speak with him privately. And there he stabbed him in the stomach. So he died for shedding the blood of Asahel, Joab's brother. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before Yahweh for the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May the guilt fall on the head of Joab and on all his father's house. And may the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who is leprous, or who holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. So Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. Pause. So we see this very deceptive ploy, this ruse by Joab, bringing Abner back. Abner's thinking he was supposed, the king wanted him back for some reason. He pulls him off to the side and stabs him and leaves him to die there. And it's because of the death of Asahel. Now, there's a difference between those 2 deaths, and the author uses 2 different words. He does not refer to Asahel's death as a murder. He just says that he was killed. There is a difference between killed and murdered. There's a difference between killed and murdered. But he describes Asahel as being killed by Abner, but he describes Abner as being murdered by Joab and by Abishai, although we're not told that Abishai isn't mentioned in the story proper. He's only mentioned there at the end in verse 30. But the blame for the murder goes on both of them. Now, what's the difference, PB? Well, it's an excellent question. Asahel was killed in a battle. Yes, it was a one-on-one competition at that point. And yes, Abner may have been may not have been, exactly frontal about it, or we may have been tricky about it. We don't know. We can kind of read into that text a bit, but Joab's killing of Abner did not take place in a battle. The death of Asahel did not provide, since it took place during a battle, there was no blood guilt related to it. So there should be no vengeance or retribution on Abner for that. That's the way it worked at the time. It was war. This is not war. This was a murder planned and executed. This there is blood guilt for. That's the difference between the two words, killed and murdered. Okay. And so the author is very clear about that. The author is also very clear that David had nothing to do with it. So, as David says, my family is bloodless, guiltless in this shedding of blood. We had nothing to do with it. And he pronounces a curse upon Joab and Joab's whole family. Wow. And what a curse, multiple layers of curse on it. Never be without one who has a discharge, which means that, well, at least one person will constantly be unclean, unable to participate in community activities, especially the worship of Yahweh. One who is leprous, same situation. One would have to be completely separated from community and live outside the bounds. One who holds a spindle. We're not 100% sure what that means, but it sounds like saying one person who would be incapable of doing man's work and would have to do woman's work instead. I'm sorry to phrase it that way, but we're talking about something from, 2,800 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. So we have to keep it in that context, that working with a spindle would be woman's work rather than working with a sword, we would presume, or something else. And so they would always have someone who was too weak to be a real man, and have to work as a woman, or who falls by the sword. Another one who loses in battle, or one who lacks food. So somebody who doesn't have enough to eat, quite obviously. All right. Wow. And now Abishai is pulled into this as well as Abner. So picking up from there. Oh, and that's not the end of it, of course. Now the question is, we remember how quickly and swiftly David brought down justice on the Amalekite who had claimed to have killed Saul, and which that there was blood guilt on there because that was the Lord's anointed, and because it was, it wasn't as part of an actual battle, although the guy didn't do it, but he claimed to have done it. But we remember how swift David's justice was for that, how swiftly he meted out justice and had him executed on the spot. But here, Abner is not executed, and it is, blood guilt is upon him. He has done wrong, but David doesn't kill him. He curses him substantially, but he doesn't kill him. In fact, he keeps him, and we're going to see him, that David relies on him in the future for good things and for deceptive purposes as well. We might wonder, first of all, why he didn't have Abner executed. The answer might be, well, for several different reasons. First of all, they are related, right? Joab is his nephew, so there might be that. There might be some family limits going on, but there also might be some added. Would David's army be happy with him executing Abner, their leader, this great warrior? So there could be political considerations going on in his mind, or he may just be almost, I don't want to say afraid, but concerned about victory, thinking that if I have him executed, I don't have anybody that can really take his place. He is my warrior among warriors, kind of thing. So we don't know. Picking up from there, what does David do next? He mourns the same way he did for Saul. Perhaps not as grandly, but close. Then David said, and he makes Joab part of it. Wow. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn over Abner. Wow, pause. Wow. Yeah, you just killed Abner, but you know what? You're going to mourn along with the rest of us. So tear your clothes and put on sackcloth. Woo. Continuing, and King David followed the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron. The king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. The king lamented for Abner, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered, as one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. And all the people wept over him again. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat something while it was still day. But David swore, saying, so may God do to me and more if I taste bread or anything else before the sun goes down. All the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people in all Israel understood that day that the king had no part in the killing of Abner, son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? Today I am powerless, even though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too violent for me. Yahweh, pay back the one who does wickedly in accordance with his wickedness. Pause. End of chapter. So we see there at the end, we hear in those words at the end, David saying, these guys are too much for me. They're too violent. He said, but you know what? I'm leaving it in God's hands. I'm leaving it in God's hands. God will give retribution and vengeance, or however you want to phrase it. So anyway, my friends, that's it for today. That's the end of our passage for today. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something as we've gone through it, that God has spoken to you in some way. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything our living, loving, active God is doing in your lives, in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends,